Welcome to the Lobster Talks podcast by Lobster Capital, where we celebrate the bold thinkers and innovators driving change in the startup world. I'm your host, Gabriel Jarrison, and today I am very, very, very excited that we have the two brothers behind Siglo, Isaac and Joel. Both of you, thank you so much for joining me today.
I'm excited to be here with you.
Brilliant.
Thanks, Gabriel.
Brilliant. Let's get started. Before we start, as a starter, please tell us a little bit about Siglo first. And of course, you're going to tell us as well about yourself. But what is Siglo? Why is it such a revolutionary new thing for Mexico?
Sure. So Siglo is an ISP, an internet service provider in Mexico. We launched about 3.5 years ago, I guess. We officially launched about 3 years ago, I guess, into the market. But in Latin America, connectivity is a big issue. Connectivity is super important everywhere, but a big, significant part of Latin America still doesn't have high-speed, consistent connectivity. And for us, that's super important. I don't think we need to talk too much about the economic implications of connectivity. I think it's pretty well documented out there. But we realized that there was a big need in the market, looking at using kind of some of the latest wireless technology that we could deploy quickly, give people good home internet, good home wireless broadband where they can be connected all the time, and not limit how much internet they consume, because it's 2024, but unfortunately there's still actually companies out there that give internet, but you can only consume this much internet, and then you're cut off. So we decided we needed to make it really simple, fast internet, only one package, only internet, make it really easy to pay, and you can pay as you go. In Latin America, I think that's a big differentiator, is a lot of people still live, somewhat day to day, week to week, month to month. So our users, some of them pay as little as 3 days at a time. Most pay about a week at a time. And once they pay, they get unlimited access to the high-speed internet. So that's kind of what we've been up to the last couple of years.
That's awesome.
Just to add to that, I think in the United States and perhaps in parts of Europe, it's easy to think that connectivity is black and white. Either you have internet or you're in the middle of nowhere with no internet. But in reality, in Latin America, most people are somewhere in between. They have some internet. They might have a lot of internet. They might not have much at all. Almost everyone has a smartphone. It's usually going to be Android, and connectivity is prepaid. The average mobile user in Mexico uses 6 gigs a month. But when they get Siglo, they start using 10 gigs a day. And that's the difference. So, of course they have Facebook. Of course they are on WhatsApp. Of course they use the internet. But they're constantly thinking, oh, wait, I only have 6 gigs this month, or else I have to pay more. But all of a sudden they get Siglo and they're, going crazy, watching all kinds of videos, doing video chats, gaming, things that aren't possible with a prepaid connection from a mobile network.
Internet is not black and white. There's a little bit of internet and unlimited. And there's also some days you might have unlimited, some days you might not. Like you said, Joel, if you're paying for 3 days, the next 3 days you might not have internet. So it's not black and white like it is for us, where you get unlimited per month. And would you mind telling us a little bit as well about your technology? Because I think it's really cool. So I'm summing it up, but you're going to be able to tell it better than me. You put an antenna on your roof, and then you've installed yourself another antenna not very far, and then you get internet from there. That's crazy. Tell us more.
So we've built about a little more than 20 towers that are on rooftops in dense neighborhoods of Mexico City. It takes us about a week to put up the tower. It's very small, 9 to 12 meters. The towers connect between each other using V-band. That's 70 and 80 gigahertz. We can send up to 10 gigabits per second between towers. And then to connect to the homes, you're right, we put a small rooftop antenna on the subscriber's home, and that connects to the nearest tower. Usually we try to be within a kilometer and a half of the tower. And we use the service at our operations center, and we can have 10 people doing video calls, and it works great. It works well in any kind of weather, and it's much faster to deploy than fiber.
That's really cool. I love a creative solution to a problem that they had. As an American, as a European, you might think, oh, the only solution is to bring them internet like we have internet for us. You dig trenches in the street, etc. Where actually there are new ways, there are innovations, which allows you to drive the cost down, to drive adoption, And that's something that I can only applaud, and it's super smart. Congrats. So maybe tell us, like, how did you guys come up with the idea? What was the aha moment? Like, oh, wait a second, we can do things differently. We can actually bring them internet with a new method. And I believe it existed before, maybe somewhere else. But how did you guys connect the dots and decided to go for this?
It's a good question. So first of all, Isaac and I, in a less direct way, were already in kind of the connectivity space. We were fascinated by this idea that we need to get more people connected, and that brings all sorts of good things. And actually, our previous startup, we had an app. And what we did in that case for Android phones is we take brand sponsored content, surveys sometimes, and ads, and we put them on the lock screen of a user's Android phone. And it was opt-in. You could just swipe and open your phone like normal, or you can swipe the other way and you can kind of engage with the content. And our whole premise there was, let's get brands to pay for connectivity. So every time that users are engaging with this content, they would win points and they could exchange those points for mobile top-ups with any of the carriers. So I still believe it was a great idea of kind of getting the brands to flip the bill. But it turns out that ad spend is very seasonal. Some brands don't like the idea that their money is actually going to sponsor internet. They're not quite comfortable with that. It was a pretty difficult business model. From a user point of view, it did really well. We got like a couple million users. But anyway, so we were kind of fascinated with this idea of connectivity, but we were also frustrated that we weren't quite able to make it work and scale from a business point of view the way that we wanted to. However, a few years ago, before we started Siglo, a good friend of ours, he resides in the Bay Area. He's a founder of a wireless hardware company. And he came to visit us in Mexico. And I remember very well, we rented a car and we drove out to some of the areas exactly where we're operating today, which are very much kind of working class, very dense, solid concrete, few trees, houses all over the place. And this brilliant guy, Omar's his name, and Berkeley PhD. He's looking around. He's like, guys, we can do something better here. We can build this kind of lightweight network. It's going to be wireless. We don't have to worry about cables and all of that. And I think that was the moment that like you said, that moment that it was like, oh, wait a second. We've been struggling to get brands to flip a tiny bit of the bill, feeling like it's not really making a difference. Well, yeah, maybe we actually need to build a little network and become the provider, not just the middleman trying to squeeze off some little margin there, and very difficultly. Let's become the provider, and then we can offer unlimited internet. And that just made a lot of sense to us, given where we had come from. So that was the moment we kept talking to Omar about that. And yeah, eventually Siglo was born. That was kind of right on the onset of COVID, so that we kind of hit a couple. It definitely got into pause mode for a few months before we actually got things going. But for me, that would be that moment. And of course, we've had tons of aha moments along the way, other things that we've learned, insights. But that was kind of the moment was like, okay, let's do this. I'd never built an ISP before. But hey, I think I understood something about the needs of the market, what people wanted, try to build something that worked a little better for that than what's out there.
And that's what being an entrepreneur is all about.
Another aha moment was when we started by just doing monthly payments. And so you pay $20 a month. And I think Joel came up with the idea. He's like, what if we let people pay $5 a week? And I was just like, we've never heard of a ISP charging by the week. And I was like, wow, let's just try it. And I think that was another aha moment that was just like, wow, a lot of people, every day they go out and they purchase tomatoes or vegetables and they go and sell them somewhere, or they purchase this material and they go and sell it. They're business people, entrepreneurs, small local entrepreneurs. And for them, they have to allocate their cash to purchasing inventory or, buying food for the day. And so to make a monthly payment is a big commitment. And I think that was really an aha moment, because all of a sudden 70% of our subscribers were paying by the week. And that was when people were like, oh yeah, get Siglo. You can pay 100 pesos a week, And that $5 payment, I think, was definitely an aha moment. And just, wow, how can we make this easier for our market? And it's something that really wouldn't have occurred to me before. Pay by the week? Why would you want that? Like, I want to pay my internet 6 months at a time because I don't want to forget and somehow like they cut it off. That's my worst nightmare. And it's happened to me before in Mexico. But for our market, that's what they love that about Siglo.
It's interesting as well. I love this notion of doing things because they've always been done that way. So internet has always been done charged monthly. And so you don't even really think about it. You're like, I'm just going to do that. It's been said a lot about Elon Musk and his rockets. Is like, oh, this is how you have to do a rocket. And he's like, wait a second, let me start from scratch and rebuild everything. I'm just comparing you guys to Elon Musk. I think, I think we're fine with this. But I love that.
I'm a little offended. But
yeah, you went through a new market and adapted to that. And so do you guys remember when the first tower went up and when the first users started browsing? Do you guys remember that moment? And if yes, do you remember that feeling? Because I'm guessing, it's always the case when you're launching, but for you, it's a physical thing in the physical world, having a real impact on people's lives. How did you guys felt at that moment?
Well, I guess there was a couple steps because, the first person, my brother and I were walking through the neighborhood. We were in the process of putting up the tower and some guy came up to Joel and was like, hello, my name's George in English. And, in that neighborhood, we've never had someone come up to us and speak English. So he started talking to the guy. And he's like, oh, yeah, I live around here. I used to live in California and I worked there for years. And anyway, we stayed in touch with them. And he introduced us to his son, Jesus or Jesus. And he was, I think, 20 years old at the time. So, Jesus was the first person we went up onto his roof and set up the equipment and it worked. And so that was kind of the aha moment, like, oh, wow, you know what? The technology works. Anecdotally, Jesus works for us now. He's writing pretty complicated SQL queries. He's become a network expert, one of our most valuable employees, and he's taught himself everything, just using online courses and MOOCs and things like that. But so that was kind of the moment, oh, wow, the technology is actually going to work. But I guess it was different when we started seeing that people were actually paying for it. And that was kind of a big, it's good enough that people are going to pay for it and they're going to keep paying for it. So that was the second thing. So first was the technology works, and two, product market fit. People like this so much that they're going back every month or every week and paying for it.
Although Isaac makes it sound so easy that, we just went up on the roof and it worked. I seem to remember a couple of long days where it doesn't seem to work. What we do today 10, 20 times a day really fast. That first time we did it, and I think that's part of actually maybe some of our success is that we didn't have the experience in this. And I think it goes back to your prior point that, of rethinking everything, and not just because the way it's been done is the way it needs to continue to be done. I think the fact that we knew nothing about this helped us out a bit. But there was definitely a day or two where man, this thing, we can't get it quite aimed right. There's no internet coming through here. But we figured it out, and now I think we're pretty dang good at that. But yeah, and the same on the product market fit. I remember days where I and my wife, we were out in the markets, the open air markets, and we were passing out flyers and trying to get those first customers. And we met some cool flyers up and literally walking through the market, hey, look, internet. And people were interested, but yet it was hard to get them to trust us. Who's this crazy gringo walking through the market? I've never even seen a gringo in this neighborhood. And now he's trying to sell me something in the market. This is crazy. And I remember finally one day there was a guy that was like, all right, I want it. Sounds good. So we're like, where do you live? And on WhatsApp, I'm telling our one installer and the guy who built our towers and everything, Ugo, we got a sale. Come on, it's over at this. Literally, we didn't have any cars then. So they grabbed the ladder between two guys. They're running down the street, knock on this guy's door. The guy opens up and he's like, who are you guys? Hey, we're Siglo. We're here to put your internet in. He's like, he looked at it. He was looking up and down. He's like, nah, I don't want it. And he shuts the door in their face.
Ouch.
And we realized it was just nobody trusted us yet. At that point, we went out and actually bought t-shirts that say Siglo and little name tags and caps so that we'd look a little more official, and we got better at it. But it definitely wasn't an overnight process. Yeah, it was fun memories now. At the time, it was kind of hitting our head against the wall.
That's super interesting, and I think inspiring for entrepreneurs listening to us. You said something, you said, now, today, we're doing it 10, 15 times a day, super easily. But at the time, the first time, it took us days and days and days. And it's really something to remember when you're starting a new business and you're struggling. In a year or 5 years from now, this is going to become so easy for you. Repeats makes perfect. And you're struggling. It's the path. You have to. There's no shortcut. but in the end, it's going to become super, super easy for you. I think that's super inspiring. I want to piggyback on a little bit on that topic. I want to talk about difficulties, and then we're going to talk about some wins. But obviously, building a startup is hard. You're building a startup with a lot of hardware. You're building a startup where you have to install hardware at people's houses, which is much harder. You're building a startup abroad, also much harder. So tell me, what do you want to share about some difficulties you've had along the way, and maybe what's your thinking about that? Because I know being an entrepreneur is putting out fires on a daily basis, but you guys must be putting out so many more fires than anyone else on a daily basis. What's your framework to think about this and to handle this?
So many things you could say about that. But I think that you're right. I think that what we're doing is there's so many moments, I guess I could say, where, Isaac and I, we talk for an hour and we're just like, what are we doing? Why didn't we build a SaaS company? That's what a lot of startups do. It's super scalable. Yeah, we can do it with a handful of people. We can go to Bali and do it from my laptop. Whereas what we chose, it has that hardware element. I think that definitely has been a challenge. It's also a challenge for some VCs, right? They're afraid of that because they like this nice little formula that's been pretty proven. SaaS, get a couple smart guys, have a good idea, build it quickly, scale it. Where there's been a lot of sweat and just grinding out on the streets that have had to happen with what we've built. But it's also, I would say it's more rewarding, I think, in my experience, now that we've kind of come through this, because I do feel like we built something real. I can look up and walk down or drive down the street now, and I can point out just random antennas that are on rooftops that, hey, that's Siglo, and feel that like tangible impact. It's pretty cool. But there have been a lot of moments where it's, funding, of course, is always, about, what has it been? It's been almost 2 years when the market started shifting, right? When we first launched, it was hot. LatAm was hot. There's a lot of funds flowing in. And we're burning a lot because we're investing in infrastructure. And we needed to do that to kind of cover the areas that we're in. But our plan A was, almost 2 years ago, let's start raising our Series A. But I remember so clearly kind of just like watching the market, high level, in that moment where I thought, you know what, things are changing. We're going to have to either raise the Series A really fast or we might not be so easy. And we didn't raise the Series A at the time. We couldn't quite get it because all of a sudden investors started freaking out and they just froze and stopped making any investments for a few months as they're trying to let the dust settle and figure out what's going to happen. So we had a big decision then. It was like, okay, we'd be justified if we said, yeah, you know what, we're about out of money, that we're going to need a lot more money. So we're going to just, let's call it quits there. I even remember some pretty clear conversation with some of our investors, basically telling us that, like, look, guys, you have a little bit of money in the bank. You need to liquidate your team and good run. What's next? But yet something in that moment, it was like, we couldn't, but wait a second here. We built something. There's something real there. There's a lot of assets out there that are getting internet. People are paying for it. They're coming back for it. Like, maybe there's another path. And in a long story short, we decided to keep pushing on. We're still here. It hasn't been easy. We haven't grown because we decided instead we needed to, get to a place where we could sustain the company. So yeah, it's been a lot of hard decisions. We realized we could do a lot. We could do just as much with a lot less. So we ended up having to, do several rounds of cuts of our team. At one point we were up to 80. Today we're at 20, doing about the same. So, we learned to be a lot more efficient. But yeah, it's tough. It's tough at times, but it's also, you got to push through sometimes, right? The best stories are those, like, we're at the bottom and we could have given up and we kept pushing through. And I think we're seeing the fruits of that.
It is the ultimate founder journey. Please, Isaac, add something to that.
Just, in addition to hardware, there's a big people component to what we do. Unfortunately, when we get a new customer, we can't just have them download an app. And so we have to drive to their house and then we go up onto their roof. So we literally like walk through their entire house to their kitchen. Like, oh, the grandma's sleeping over there. We say hello to her. Like, there's a dog on the roof. They have to, like, oh, can you tie up your dog? And like the dog's trying to bite you. But like someone has to physically go there and then like, run cable and hide the cable. And you get to know them almost in a somewhat intimate way, which comes back to that trust issue Joel was talking about. But if I think back 5 or 6 years, I remember once I hired someone for another company, and Joel told me, he was like, I don't think this person's a good fit. They own a car. I'm like, who owns a car? It's 2017. Everyone uses Uber now and shared transport. This person's just not a good cultural fit. Now, both Joel and I own cars. We have a bunch of cars that we have to use for our installers. We have to manage them. We have to, get them repaired all the time. They're always breaking down. And like, oh man, what a headache. I hate it. I hate having to manage all these cars. But then also just the people, we have great people that work for us, but we've had a few bad people that work for us. And we've had some people that were on our team that are very dear to Joel and I, and they quit because this person had such a big heart. And, we're working in neighborhoods where there's a lot of people that it's a marginalized part of the Mexico City. And so this person, I remember he was buying phones and giving phones to some of our installers. And he's such a big heart and he was trying to help them out any way he can. And then it turns out some of those people that he was helping out were stealing from us. We'd given them probably a job that was paying them better than they'd ever been paid before in their lives. And yet still they chose to steal from us. And that the person that was giving them the phones, he was, a senior employee leader. I think it was really hard for him. And just that, we're giving, and at the same time, these people are then turning around and stealing from us, and managing that and managing the equipment's not being stolen and keeping track of that. I think that's been one of the frustrating things from my perspective as well.
That's super interesting. Again, it goes to show that, from the outside, you're like, well, yeah, you just install internet at people's homes and that's it. Well, you look at what's really happening and you have to manage people being disappointed by someone else and stealing and stuff like that. It's something that I heard Alex Hormozi said. It's the uneducated optimism. It's like when you look from the outside, you're thinking everything's easy. And when you actually look from the inside, there's a lot of stuff that you got to manage. I want to touch on what Joel said just earlier about going with profitability or break even instead of growth, which is very, very likely the right move. So I want to mention that. Congratulations on making that tough call. It is likely the right move, again, because you're still here and you're still able to grow and fight another day. And I also wanted to ask you, Joel, you mentioned about potentially raising Series A super quickly or going the other route. Looking back, knowing what you know today and having lived those last 2 years, do you actually wish that you did rush through a Series A and you could have gone through, breezed through those 2 years with a bank account full of cash?
Wow, that's a hard one. No regrets. Yeah, there's times when I think that, the last couple of years would have been a lot easier. But I also know that we would have continued down a same path of burning a lot of cash, having excess team, things like that. So, I mean, the course that we took forced us to become efficient in a whole new way that we didn't realize we would not have realized was possible if we hadn't chose that route. And I think that, and you're from the other side can probably say this better than I can, but I have a feeling that a lot of investors, and VCs in the last couple of years, now they admire cash flow positive companies. They admire companies that have revenue at the beginning. Whereas if we go back a couple of years, it was almost like that was, it's always a good thing, but it was almost like if you seek that too soon, something's
irrelevant.
Wrong, right? And I have a feeling that's flipped a bit. And now it's like, seek revenue as soon as possible and prove that you can get it. And then we can start scaling that up. Yeah. I don't know. I'd like to know your perspective on that, but I think that the VC mentality has shifted a bit and to admire the kind of bootstrapping a little bit more.
It has changed 100%. I mean, you're absolutely right that 2 years ago, 3 years ago, no one cared. It was not even a topic of conversation, the burn rate. It was just about the growth, and burn was not an issue because you could always get more money as long as you're growing. And it has changed 360 degrees. Yep. Now it's like one of the first questions. What's your runway? What's your burn? How efficient are you? And so, like you said, you became super efficient. And so you became more attractive to VCs for sure. Yeah.
About a year ago, Silicon Valley Bank went belly up almost. And we were talking with a lot of other founders, and all the founders were worried, like, oh, you know what? I have 3 years of runway that's locked up in that bank. If I lose that, everything's going to. And at the time, our bank account in the United States was empty. There was literally no money. But every day, 1,000 people go into the store and they deposit a few dollars, and it was all in Mexican pesos. So we watched it incredibly closely. It was interesting, but we didn't have this fear like everyone else did. They're like, oh man, like my future is locked up in this bank. We were like, no, our future is our customers that keep coming back and paying and paying and paying. So that was, I think in some ways it was a little bit comforting.
Good old cash.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're the only startup not scared of Silicon Valley Bank crashing. But that's, I mean, your future is your customers. You know, I tell a lot of entrepreneurs who are trying to raise and they're not necessarily raising. I tell them, raise from your customers. Customers' money is better than investors' money. So if your customers are ready to pay you, this is what you should go after. And this is exactly what you did. Cash tied up. Maybe LatAm was a little less in favor. And you're like, well, we only have one solution left, is to go get money from our customers, to serve them, and to really give them what they want. So we spoke about the hardships. Yeah. Let's speak a little bit about the wins. Now's the time for you guys to brag and tell us all how amazing it's going now. Any wins? Any really things that you're really proud of that you want to share?
Well, there's definitely a few things, but I will just say we're not there yet, right? We're still pretty in a drawn out early stage. So we'll see when the final chapter is written, but we're here. And I think that's the big part of it. And not only are we here, a couple of months ago, we started a deal with the largest retailer in Mexico, which is Walmex, Walmart in Mexico. It's not in Mexico, Walmart's not just Walmart. It's also several other even larger chains, Bodega Aurrera, Express. So we've initiated working with them, and we're really excited about that. We've actually had people in a number of stores selling directly. People can go to the cash register in the Walmart store and make the payment for their install and their top ups as they go. So we're really excited about that because it gives us, for a couple of reasons. One, it just feels to us, and I think also to the subscribers at the end of the day, it feels like, okay, this isn't some random little company that pops up and gets appear. It's in a Walmart. That's real, right? So it gives a bit of credibility. But from our point of view, we're already seeing the first signs that the subscriber that comes through that channel behaves a little bit better over time, which is good. It's still a little early to know about churn, but as we just see behavior as far as topping up, things like that. So we're excited about that. And then also they're a partner that we can grow a lot with, because they have stores all over the country. So we're excited about that, and they're excited about connectivity. So that's good. So that's one big win that we're really excited about where it might go. We've been in talks with other similar kinds of groups that are interested in doing something similar. So we're excited. Connectivity is a big issue, and everybody knows it still in LatAm. And everyone's kind of looking for a solution or looking for something they can tie into what they're doing as kind of added value. So I think that's a big one. But I don't know, Isaac, what other ones you come to your mind?
I guess just the churn for me is the biggest thing. And seeing the users keep coming back and paying. Whenever you're a prepaid service, people can leave your product at any point. So, 2.1, 2.3% of churn a month. That's just incredible for a prepaid service, I think.
That's interesting. Damn.
That was a big bet that we made. And I think going back to an earlier conversation, where historically internet providers, they would never do prepaid. You never want that way because you want to lock somebody in. You want to know that for the next 12, 18 months, there's a pretty good chance that person's going to keep paying because by contract they have to. And our bet was, wait a second, if we're giving something that we know they need, internet, and we're giving a good service around it, and it actually works, then they're going to come back. So I think at early on, a lot of people were skeptical of that, and probably still that model. And that was kind of the bet that we made. But like Isaac said, the churn has shown that, it's not, once people have it, they stick with it. And I think that's the most, and I mentioned this earlier too, like just driving down the street and, looking up and seeing like, oh, look, there are Siglo. Oh, look, there's another one. Or sometimes we go up on a rooftop because we're, sighting around and it's like, how many antennas can we count? And to me, that's the win, that's the, wow, something worked here. People are using it. and they keep paying for it. I go into our CRM sometimes because sometimes I jump in and like manually applying cash payments and that come into the bank and stuff. And I always look because we have what we call a Siglo score at the top of the user. And you see, so okay, it's 100. Oh wow, cool. So I'll dig in a little bit just because I'm curious. And I'm like, oh wow, this user's been with us for 3 years now, or they've been with us for 2 years now, and they paid really well. And it's like, wow, okay, we're doing something right. And I think that that's just that fulfilling piece, that we're giving them something that's needed. We've managed to build something that they keep coming back to, right? Now, so to me, that's what I'm proud of.
It's heartwarming to listen to you, and I'm sure it does come across for anyone listening to us. Again, we've mentioned entrepreneurship is super hard, and then this is what it looks like on the other side. And like you said, you haven't made it. It's not $1 billion exit yet. Someday soon, hopefully, but still already today, having fought all of those struggles, you have that sense of accomplishment. You have that sense of, like you said, you look around and you're like, wow, it's actually there. It's actually real. It's actually working. So I'm hoping to anyone looking at us, watching this and struggling potentially with a business, remember there's on the other side, there's this kind of feeling, and it's absolutely amazing. You mentioned a sentence just right now that says, oh, we made something people want. And obviously it is going to drive me immediately to YC. You've been through YC. That's how we met. As you know, I exclusively focus on investing in YC startups with Lobster Capital. And because I believe YC is the best, but I would like to hear from you. What did YC bring you guys? Was it a positive experience? What did you get out of it?
Yeah, I think in summary, I'll let Isaac speak for himself, but I think it was a positive experience. That phrase, make something people want, it's so simple, but it's so profound, right? And I think that kind of summarizes the YC mentality all around of what they build and what they impart to the founders that go through. But yeah, I guess there's a couple things quickly that come to mind about YC. One is, especially being a LatAm based startup, YC offers that global stage. Like we can make trips to San Francisco and New York or to Europe and talk about what we're doing, but YC has just created that whole experience that puts you on the stage, and investors start lining up because they know that it's like going to an Ivy League school or something, and they just know by the fact that they went there, they can't be complete idiots, right? Maybe. I'm sure we got in somehow, but there's been some kind of filter. And I think that they've done a good job of curating that whole process from, the beginning of the batch to the end, and talking to investors and the demo day, and kind of creating this kind of like wave behind it, which is super valuable. Again, I think for anybody, but even more so being kind of an emerging market based. The other thing I think is just the network. And the network doesn't stop after the batch. I'm still very active in several different, YC, what's up groups and meetups. And, we do an alumni get together every year. And that there's this enormously valuable group of founders, some of them hugely successful, some of them still in the early stages, but at any point you can reach out and say, hey, what are you guys doing about this? Or I need to talk to someone high up at Stripe. How do I get to them? Because I really need to fix this problem really quickly. Or, who can give me an intro to somebody, that kind of thing is super valuable. And I think that the alumni network is very strong. And I think those are the two things that I would say in my mind were the biggest kind of reasons, and that I'm very happy about that experience. And I could go on, but I don't know, Isaac, if you have something else to add to that.
I 100% agree. I was at a conference last week in Merida, Impact Investing, and it's like in some YC groups. Is anyone from YC here? Someone immediately responds, the direct message. We meet up tonight. Another YC founder is organizing a dinner I'm going to. So I think that the value, it's not in the acceleration program, it's in the network that keeps giving. So yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah.
And it's something you can't get anywhere else. You said, Joel, it's an Ivy League. I do the same comparison quite often. If you're in, you're in. If you're not, there's no way you can get that anywhere else. Okay. Do you want to tell us about the future of Siglo, where you want to take the company? What are your hopes and dreams and aspirations, and where you see yourselves in the future?
Sure. I mean, I think, yeah, big picture, there's still huge connectivity gap. Like Isaac said, it's not necessarily black and white. There's this huge gray area of underconnected in Mexico, but all south of here. So I think that our big dream here is that we can do what we're doing, but scale it a whole lot more. Our challenge, of course, is that we are in a business where to grow requires a lot of capex investments, building out network. And we're always, we're agnostic as far as what that looks like. We're always trying new things, new technologies. But yeah, I think the partnership with Walmart's exciting. I think there'll be others like that. But yeah, it's just about now taking kind of the engine that we built and let's put some gas on it and start growing. We have mapped out a whole area of expansion, which is kind of the peripheral area around Mexico City, which is massive, right? But yeah, there's other cities that we're looking at. We want to get to soon, but there's still massive opportunity right around the city. So that's next step. And then looking at some other, focusing primarily on dense urban areas. That's where the economics make the most sense. That's where the most impact can be had, the easiest. But ultimately, yeah, I would like to be in small little towns too. But I think that there's other solutions like, Starlink and things like that might be better solutions for those kind of more rural areas. But yeah, its connectivity is huge and it's not going to be solved overnight. And the incumbents aren't solving it, right? A lot of our users actually come from them. It's just not a product that was built for them. So I think that there needs to be more companies that are looking at connectivity in Latin America. We know of a few of them, but not a lot of them. But yeah, we can't rely on the incumbents to completely fill that gap. So a lot of work to do, in short.
All right. I like to ask this question towards the end of our interviews about either a book or a quote that either you heard recently and you liked, or even better, something that's been with you for a long time. For me, there are books and quotes that stay with me for years and years and years that really had an impact. Is there something that you guys want to share that you sort of live by in your day-to-day life that you've read somewhere or heard somewhere?
I've been reading, I like to read biographies a lot because I think that it gives you a perspective of, the long term, how someone builds something and how they develop character that allows them to build something in the future. So in the last few months, I've been on this binge for Theodore Roosevelt and the Panama Canal, and just like the vision of someone to, connect two oceans, which I originally it was Lesseps who tried to, who built the canal in Egypt and who tried to build a canal in Panama. But then, 40 years after that, Lesseps started building it. Theodore Roosevelt completed it. Just the vision and tenacity to do that, and really charisma that he could inspire people to want to build that. So that's been fascinating to me lately.
Awesome.
That's a good one. No, I mean, I listen to tend to spend being in a city like this, a lot of time in traffic. So listen to a lot of books, podcasts. I'm not sure. There's not one that comes to mind as far as books that I would say that's had a huge impact in the last couple months. There's a lot of little ones. But I think I regularly just listening to people, like Sam Altman and not that I agree with 100% of everything that everyone says at all. But I think that those are the kind of people that are building really big things and are rethinking things completely that tend to inspire me. And I guess I've been thinking a lot about and reading a lot about, that balance between, as founders, we tend to kind of, we bend realities, right? If you think about it, founders, it's kind of stupid, right? Even any investor knows you're going to diversify in a whole lot of different startups, hoping that, knowing that, probability wise, some of these are going to be successful. And as a founder, you're kind of putting everything in one thing, in one little basket, right? And the reason we do that is somehow in our minds, we're convinced, beyond probabilities that no, what we're doing is actually way better than everything else. And this is it. And we're going to put all of our time and money and everything into this one thing. And that, it's stupid at times, but yet when we believe it enough, we build that into reality. But at the same time, we can't be delusional either, right? We have to kind of be on the edge of delusion, but yet also be in touch with reality and not lose fact of the data and what's actually happening in the business. And that balance is tough sometimes, right? Because sometimes we can get too like, oh my gosh, I'm looking at these numbers and like, oh, this just doesn't work, and and it just drives us down that path. Or on the other hand, we could be just so delusional, like this is it, this is the answer to the universe, that we're ignoring that, and that's also a recipe for a train wreck, right? So I think a lot about the balance between that. And I think that a good founder has to have the correct balance. They have to have both of those sides, and what that looks like. And I don't know if I have it all figured out, but I think that that's something worth thinking a lot about.
It's awesome. You have to be crazy, but you also have to be super real and super realistic about what's going on. So you have to be a crazy person and super realistic person at the same time. I love that very, very much. When can people find out more about you guys and about Siglo?
That's a good question. Write us, find us, and communicate with us. Happy to add you on anyone on mailing list or tell you more about what we're doing. And obviously our website, it's in Spanish, but it's more focused on users. But yeah, you can find me on Joel at Siglo, or you can feel free to look for me at Joel WP on X, Twitter. Also, you can get me that way, I think, on Signal and Telegram as well. So happy to talk with people and love to tell more about what we're doing.
That's a great list. People can find you everywhere. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you both very, very much for joining me today. And to our listeners, thanks for joining as well. Don't forget to subscribe for more content like this and conversations like this one. And don't forget to rate us and review on your favorite podcast platform. Until next time on the Lobster Talks, stay bold, stay curious, and remember, big ideas start somewhere.